So this video is going to be a basic hip warm-up series for like a lower body day, whether it's a squat day or a deadlift day. And some of this stuff's going to be very basic, some of it's going to be a little more complex, and it's going to depend on the equipment that you have. But we're going to try to give you probably about 7 to 10 different things you can do to try to warm up your hips before a heavy day if they've been sore, tight, etc. Especially if you work a job where you're sitting a lot. So hopefully you can take a couple of these things and implement them and see a change. So this one, I love how this one feels. This would probably be one of the first go-to things I would do to warm up my hips if they're feeling really stiff or beat up, is I've got a pair of, and there's another one hanging right here. These are super old knee wraps. They're very light, very worn out, very stretchy. I mean, you could probably buy like a $5 pair of knee wraps at like Walmart would suffice for this. You can use voodoo bands. You can use stiffer knee wraps if that's what you have. But what I'm gonna do is wrap up my hip as high as I can towards my hip crease and groin. And I'm just going to wrap that, and I'm going to wrap it fairly tight because I'm not going to have this on very long. But I'm going to wrap my hip up. And then what I'm going to do, a lot of times I'll do both at the same time. And I'm going to, and I can do it without holding on to something, or I'll hold on to something, and what I'm going to do is just squat down and back up. And I'll do about 20 reps of this squat here. And what that's going to do is this is just going to help compress as all those tissues move. It's going to help open up some of those things that are real tight in those hips. So this would be a go-to. When I'm done, I just pop it off, and we're good to go. One of my go-tos for loosening up right away, after I do that, I'll squat without, see, oh, how's that feel? Oh man, that hip feels great, so I need to do my other one. And then, or you can do both at the same time and say, hey, maybe I'm good to head on to squatting and see how I feel now. So what I have here is I'm setting up a simple sled drag. If you have access to this, absolutely wonderful to warm up for lower body day, especially squat day. Well, really deadlift day as well. But I recommend Spud Inc. products. So this is their sled pulling belt. This is their, I don't know what this is called, their long strap for towing strap, I guess. I mean, it's rated to pull like 100,000 pounds. So for what I'm using it for, it'll last forever. This belt's easy because I can do both forwards and backwards if I wanted to. I can just spin around in the belt and it just cinches tight. But when you're walking a sled drag, to warm up your hips, you want to walk in this heel-toe motion. So I'm going to think about stepping and digging my hamstring in and pulling myself along, kind of like I'm doing a leg curl. So I'm going to step and pull, so I don't have much camera space here. But with doing those sled drags, you can either do them with close stance, you can do them with a wide stance, etc. So something just down and back. It doesn't have to be a very heavy weight when you're doing sled drags warming up, but something that you can do to easily pump blood in the hips. You know, you can do them in all different ways. Wide stance, close stance, forwards, backwards, whatever you choose, wherever you feel helps the most, obviously do that. Play with how much weight you use and how long you're doing them for. Start for 5 minutes, do 10 minutes. See if that doesn't get you completely warmed up and ready to go, as well as even starting your entire warm-up process with maybe a 5 or 10 minute cardio warm-up on a bike or a rower or a treadmill or something. I prefer to just jump straight to this and get some work in while I'm doing that cardiovascular warm-up. So I hope this helped. Please like, subscribe, share, all that jazz, and good luck. So this is one of the most simple stretches that I have to warm up my hips. One of my favorites, especially before a sumo deadlift day, or like if I'm gonna have a squat with a little bit wider stance. What I'm gonna do is go on all fours, and I call this the frog stretch. Don't know where I got it from, but I'm gonna try to keep my legs and my ankles at about a 90-degree relationship. I don't wanna have my feet too close in towards my butt. I don't also want them super wide out, but about a 90-degree relationship. I'm gonna spread my knees as wide as I can kind of comfortably go. And then here with my hands on the ground, I'm gonna sit my hips back towards my heels, all right? I'm gonna feel this in my groin probably more than anywhere else. Sometimes you can feel it in your hips, depends on how tight you are. I'm gonna push back and hold, and then I can kind of walk forward and drop my hips to the ground. I'll feel this a little bit differently, sometimes through my abs and hip flexors. To make this stretch more aggressive, you can drop down to your elbows and then sit your hips straight back. And this right here is a lot more aggressive, and you can just spend some time hanging out here to warm up. Some people are like, oh, don't statically stretch before you squat, but sometimes if you're completely limited in your ranges of motion, go ahead and spend some time here. This is the lazy man's version of the couch stretch, kind of coined by Kelly Starrett, I guess, is where I've heard it first. But this stretch is going to be for a quad hip flexor stretch. I'm going to use an incline bench. You can use it all the way to vertical. So this one obviously adjusts flat, a little bit more flat versus nice and upright. But what I'm going to do is put my foot up on the pad of the bench and drop my knee down into the crack of the seat there. And before I do anything here, I'm going to try to squeeze this glute and squeeze that glute, and that's going to cause my hips to rotate and put a stretch on those hip flexors and quads. Trying to be as upright as possible, squeezing here, and once I feel that stretch, if I'm not getting anything out of that, I can then start shifting my hips forward, and I'm personally getting a stretch out of this angle right here, right now. So if this is too much, and some people tend to have their hamstrings cramp up if they're not warmed up properly, you can drop it down and start here. And now even if I'm here, I can squeeze, still feel a stretch, and then I can stretch forward a little bit. I'll feel it a little bit differently. Spending some time here, typically people with quite tight quads will lead to knee pain, not so much from the hips, but something that's very good to do just to warm up for those hips and getting ready for bigger lifts. So right here, I'm gonna do a simple, classic kneeling hip flexor stretch. So kneeling, I always use a pad because I have messed up knees. Standing nice and tall, kneeling nice and tall. I'm gonna squeeze this glute and then push my hips forward. So I'm gonna squeeze the glute of the knee that is down to posterior tilt the hip, so that opens up that hip flexor, pushing forward to stretch that out. If I don't feel this too much, I can take the same side hand and reach up over and back across. I can take this hand and grab that and pull it to stretch, and I'll feel that up through my psoas, a little bit up through my abs, and I can also kind of rotate both ways as I do that to try to feel that through this hip. And something to toy with if you've done the normal kneeling hip flexor stretch is if you want to add some assistance to it, you're going to add a band to a rack or something stable in front of you. You're going to hook that right under the crease of your butt cheek, and now it's going to assist pulling and opening up the front of that hip capsule. It's something that you're not going to want to do all the time, especially prior to squatting, but this can be something you can do after to help loosen up the hips for the following session, maybe your second session later in the week. So this is something simple to add in to give you a little bit more aggressive stretch, as well as what we can now do is also posterior hip stuff. So I'll switch legs here for you so the camera can see. What I'm going to do is then put that up in my front of my hip and step forward. And now I can let this band distract my hip, pulling into the posterior part of my hip, which is the one that probably most people will want to do. And then now I can either do like an RDL or a good morning, and I can even put my hands on the ground, stretch, letting this pull this femur, pulling my leg bone out of the back of my hip socket, so out of this hip, and I can kind of twist and turn this way and see how it feels if it pulls in different directions. There's not really a necessary right or wrong, just adjust until you feel like you have a good stretch. You can also do this same stretch kneeling. I can scoop forward, and now let that try to pull back here. It's trying to pull back from a kneeling position, and I can turn a little bit, and then also take my right knee, block my left leg, and sit into here, and just twist and turn, and find those tight corners where you feel like you're stiff, and just hang out, like for me right there in that. You can also turn, kind of sit into it. You know, I can also shift, go on my feet, bending down, and then also trying to push that into that hamstring, bending this knee and flexing it straight. You'll feel that tension down your hamstring. So some different stuff to do just to play around with and see what feels best for you and see where you're getting some relief. Always test and retest, so test my squat. How do things feel after that? This next stretch is called the 90-90 hip stretch. So I'm going to sit facing straight ahead. I'm going to take this front leg, put it at a 90-degree angle here. The back leg, got to make sure I'm kind of all square 90 there. My back leg needs to come out some. What I'm going to do here is try to make sure I'm sitting as upright as possible, and then I can lean forward, pointing my chest straight ahead. I can lean my chest forward, and I'm feeling this already in the back of my hip. So I'm very stiff today. After yesterday, I'm just very stiff today, but I'm going to work my chest in the direction of my knee. I can work kind of mid-shin, and I can work towards my heel. And I'll feel that all differently in this hip. I can do some PNF type stuff too, which is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, so PNF for short. What you're going to do is you're going to push your knee into the ground, push for 5 seconds, hold as hard as you can, and then relax and see if you can't stretch further. You can also, I'm terrible at it, try to work on lifting this leg up off the ground. I don't have that mobility to be able to do so. So I'll work this way, and then I'm going to work backwards. So I'm going to stay nice and tall. I use this hand to help me stay nice and tall. I'll feel a little bit more if I pick this hand up in kind of my hips. But what I'm going to do here is kind of rotate backwards and try to take this butt cheek and push this butt cheek to the ground. I'm gonna feel that all through this right hip. This is my right leg right now, there. And so you can do some different things here, as well as trying to pick the back leg up off the ground. I am actually terrible at that. It's actually a stretch I've been working on a little bit more. I used to hardly be able to sit in this position. For me to be able to do that, I have to like lean forward. I don't have that strength and or mobility. So then we'll switch, and you just bring the other leg in and switch sides, sitting at a 90-degree angle here with both legs. If I turn, we can see that I'm 90-90, sitting upright, leaning forward, and stretching backwards, kind of rolling this hip to the ground. When I lean forward, sometimes I'll feel that more in my hamstring and adductor. That's completely okay. So I just want you to try to mix it up with how you're doing these specific stretches. So this goes back to something I haven't personally done in a while. I used to do a lot in my powerlifting days. Back when I was geared powerlifting, in my warm-up is I would do hip fire hydrants. So just in an all-four position, you're going to take your knee and you're going to go drive it back, up, and driving big circles. So driving as big a circles with that right knee as I can, and then I'll reverse direction. So those are the fire hydrants, or the circle, the hip circles there. You can also do the fire hydrants where you're opening side to side. I can also do them where I drive my heel to the ceiling. So these are those classic like Suzanne Summers, like curves workouts to work your glutes. Just good stuff that you can do while you're already on the ground to warm up your hips.